Welcome to Bottom Up, a monthly podcast dedicated to issues and topics of interest to young lawyers in Wisconsin and beyond. I'm Emil Ovbiagele.
And I'm Kristen Hardy, and we're your hosts. This is the Bottom Up Podcast.
Okay, so this is Joe Forward with the State Bar of Wisconsin. Before we get started with episode 10, I do want to mention that we had some technical difficulties with this one. And so for the first 26 minutes or so, the audio is a little off. And so I do want to apologize for that, and thank you for listening.
Welcome, everyone. We're back for another episode of Bottom Up. I am here with my co-host, Emil, and we have a very special guest, a friend of ours, also a Marquette 2014 grad, Makda Fessahaye. Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome, Makda.
We've been trying to get you on this podcast for a while, and you're a busy woman.
I am very happy to be here with you guys.
Are you sure?
Very sure.
Are you ready? We're going to have you in the hot seat, hot topics.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Thanks, DJ Envy.
So it is actually Wendy Williams. It is actually Memorial Day weekend. So we are here on a Friday working hard for all of our listeners because technically everyone's off work right now. But we are here and we're going to have a great conversation. So we're going to just hop right into it. So Makda, I want you to tell the people a little bit about yourself. We know you are more or less a Milwaukee native, born in DC, but I just say you're from Milwaukee. And then you went to a private high school here in the city, and then you moved on to Northwestern. So tell us about how that came to be, why you went to Northwestern, and then what ultimately brought you back to Milwaukee.
I just want to mention that I am here presenting my own personal opinion and not representing the views of University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee.
Yeah, so raised in Milwaukee. Milwaukee is definitely a big part of my upbringing, and I went to Northwestern for undergrad, studied communications, and minored in poli-sci. I knew when I was in the 7th grade that I wanted to be a lawyer. So
I was going to say, with a major like that.
Right. You couldn't do too many other things.
I'm joking.
Well, I actually thought that I could potentially do like public relations or marketing. And that's something that's actually shown up in my career in other ways. Mm. But I went to school for communication studies and then just happened to minor in poli-sci. But I still went down the path of law. I was able to intern at Corals and Brady when I was in college for 2 summers. And when it finally came down to going to law school, I decided to come back home. It was a fairly difficult decision for me. You know, I was young. I was 21. I wanted to be in Chicago in the city. But Marquette made a pretty good offer, had a beautiful building, Eckstein Hall. And I knew that diploma privilege would be a really big asset to me in my career. And also knowing that I had like a really big network here and that would be helpful to me long term.
We really just teed this up without saying what we were going to talk about. And that's because we were talking off camera. But really, one of the focuses of this podcast episode is just kind of finding your own way. And we've talked about choosing your own path, but we all have a similar story. Not only that we graduated from the same school in the same year, but also we all graduated without a job. And we've been relatively successful, I think. I think we would categorize it that way.
So this episode's called Graduated Jobless.
I like that. Joe. I like that. So, Makda, I want you to tell us a little bit. You know, you said how you came back here. You were a little reluctant, but ultimately it worked out. Let's fast forward to graduating without a job. Where were you mentally, and how did you kind of find your first opportunity that ultimately has led to you where you are today?
Yeah, so graduating without a job was stressful to say the least, because it's graduation season right now. Like the first thing that people ask you when you graduate is what's next? And I'm like, don't know. I'm looking for a job. Yeah. And 2014 was just a time, you all were there, so you experienced it, but most people didn't have a job that graduated with us. I would say it was just a small percentage of students that had a job. So I didn't feel
I thought everyone had a job. It
No.
felt-
Oh, no.
felt
They
like
definitely did
everyone
not.
had a job.
No, I think people were lying.
People were lying.
Um,
True.
Or they had internships, right? So yeah, I could have said I had a job. I was still working at Milwaukee Public Schools at that time, but that wasn't a full-time gig.
Or what is it called? Like when you work at a law firm, but you do like doc review. People were doing
right.
doc review. That's
Right.
what a lot of people were like.
Yeah.
I'm at this firm.
Right.
It's doc
A lot of people were at like these big firms doing doc review, and it wasn't a full-time gig. But yeah, that was a really stressful time. I would say that the good thing is I was not, a lot of my experiences in law school were also non-traditional.
Mhm.
So I was working in human resources departments for lawyers. And I realized that I had to shift my mindset when I was looking for jobs that, well, perhaps I don't have to go for a law job. Maybe I can do what they were doing at Milwaukee Public Schools or Department of Public Instruction or School District of Wauwatosa, and maybe I can find a way to work in the HR space. And I needed to be okay and kind of put my ego aside and not feel like I had to practice law, at least right away. And so once I changed that mindset, I started applying for jobs like in employment relations and in compliance. And the first, I would say I remember at the time, I had two solid leads for jobs at the time. Actually, I will say one of the first offers I got out of law school was for $35,000 working at an immigration firm in Racine. And I was like, absolutely not. I could go do public relations. I don't have to even practice law to do that. And so the first full-time interview or job that I was offered was for the Department of Corrections in Madison at their headquarters, and it was for an employment relations specialist role. Everything about that job mimicked what they did at MPS, except at MPS, they require you to be a lawyer. And so I figured, well, it's not a law job, but there's a lot of legal components. I'll be able to still use my legal skills. I'll still be able to use some of the skills that I've acquired over time in my internships and in classes. And maybe that could turn into something else. Perhaps I could get my foot in the door to join legal counsel, or I also was comfortable with just staying in the HR space, or at least at that time I was. And so that's where I started. And I got to work really closely with lawyers in the Department of Administration and in legal counsel at the Department of Corrections. And so I really tried to leverage my experience to make sure that, one, they knew that I was a lawyer that was seeking some experiences and opportunity. And the job was that you would sit second chair at WERC hearings, you would process FMLA claims, you would advise on investigations, all things that if you're practicing law in an employment firm, you're doing. But I was not technically practicing in that time. So I gained a lot of experience in that time. And I also was relationship building. And so from there, I was able to land a job in the Office of Legal Counsel at the Department of Corrections. And I was the only person that hadn't practiced before in that department or in that particular office. Everyone else had been in there at least 10 years or more.
So we're going to talk about your second job afterwards. But I want to just go back to that feeling. I know it's a little hard to put yourself back in that place. Walking across the stage. On one hand, you're excited, getting your law degree. On the other hand, you don't know what tomorrow holds. How did that feel?
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Hi, Russell Nicolay here with Nicolay Law, Accident and Injury Lawyers. If you have clients that have been injured, my office would love the opportunity to help them get compensated and get their life back on track. We handle referrals and co-counsel relationships on injury cases all across Wisconsin.
Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up podcast.
I knew I needed to get a job by September. That was my timeline. I'm like, my loans are going to start kicking in, and I need to figure out what I'm going to do by the fall. And thankfully, I have a family here that would have supported me if I didn't have a job. I'm definitely grateful for that. But I didn't want to move back home either. So that also was a big component. I'm like, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get a full-time job. And again, going back to some of our classmates, right? I think, and I say this to law students all the time, some people in our class were so focused on getting a law job or a lawyer job that they weren't willing to accept anything less. And if that's your standard, that's great. I needed to get paid. I don't have anything to fall back on. I didn't have like an inheritance to fall back on. And so I had to figure out what I needed to do to get that full-time gig. And I was willing to humble myself and say, well, I won't be an attorney, but I'll figure it out later.
Where did that perspective come from? Because I think now the JD Plus jobs are more of a thing, but I don't think back when we were in law school, it wasn't as popular as it is today. So for you to have had that perspective back then, I don't remember any talks or events where I went to as a law school student where we had people telling, hey, you don't have to be a lawyer. I think they do that now.
No, we did that then. As the boss of president. We did have
someone didn't attend some of our events.
It was like, what does a JD do, or what would a JD do? They still do that event right now. I don't think they know that I was the president when we started that. But yes,
for OCI,
I was secretary.
Okay, I always remember.
That's about it.
Hey, but let me ask you this though. Thinking back to OCIs, I don't remember there being any non-traditional legal employers interviewing law school students.
Not at all. I got very lucky because when I was in my first year of law school, I got introduced to a restorative justice program. And so I did that. I wasn't supposed to be working, but I needed the money. So I was doing part-time. I was working on a restorative justice program through MPS. One of my professors at the time, in my second year, I grew interested in employment law, and he notified me of this opportunity at Milwaukee Public Schools. And that was the reason I was comfortable moving forward, because I saw people in a non-traditional space doing law. And if it wasn't for that particular experience, I wouldn't have known that that was an option for me moving forward.
You didn't tell us though.
No, actually, she told me, and I was getting ready to say this. Like, that's the importance of, think about friendship and the people in your circle, because one person doing something different can help influence you in a way. I don't even know if influence is the right word, but let you know, like, it's okay. Because I did a non-traditional job. My first job was also non-traditional. But also we're playing off of each other, like, oh, we have this opportunity. Well, money's good.
Right. You didn't tell me. We were friends.
You were Mr. Big Shot, though.
Didn't you have a job pretty quickly after?
A week after.
Yeah. So,
but it's still, I graduated without a job.
I get it, but we were all going to be fine. Right. I think that's one thing that I'll say. I think all of us.
Did you know that then?
I think I probably didn't know it then, but I mean, just looking back at it, all of us are very driven. All of us know where our strengths are and where our weaknesses are. I knew for me, academics was not my strength in law school. So I was going to play up on some of my strengths, which was relationship building, which was being able to actually put my legal knowledge and skills to use and actually materialize it into work. I wasn't the research.
You're focused on being a good lawyer, not just a good law school student.
Exactly. Right. I didn't know that at the time, but that's what it ended up being.
So, you get this role at MPS initially, non-traditional, informed. The reason you were looking in these places informed by the fact that you had worked in law school at these places. So you get your first gig. So at that point in time, non-traditional lawyer role, what was your plan?
My plan, funny enough, was I was going to do no more than 2 years at the Department of Corrections. I was going to get as much experience as I could get in those 2 years. Yeah. I was going to try to leverage it to either another HR job or to a law job.
So I'm sorry, you started out with the DOC, right? Not MPS.
I was working at MPS during law school.
Yeah, so
my first full-time job was at Corrections.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just knew after 2 years, I was like, well, I could probably leave Milwaukee. I could leave Wisconsin. Maybe I'll go to DC. I had always looked at like the federal government as an option. But I got I wouldn't say I was lucky. I worked for it, right? because of my relationship building, I became aware of some opportunities that were either opening up or were essentially, they were asking me to apply for them. And I was able to get that legal counsel job at corrections at that time. And I will say, like, one of the other people that was going for the job was a much more experienced attorney than I was. She had practiced before, but where I was able to come out on top and get the job is I had built that relationship with folks and I studied the organization, and that's what they needed in that role at the time. And so they hired me to do employment law at that time.
So you're in Madison.
Yep.
You have your first job and a second job. You eventually, when did you move to Madison? I can't remember.
2018.
So it was the second job then, or no?
It was at my second job that I moved to 2018.
So now you're moving to Madison. How is that navigating Madison compared to Milwaukee?
So I commuted for 4.5 years before finally moving to Madison. I thought I knew what Madison was when I moved there. I was definitely mistaken. Madison just has a different culture. I think in Milwaukee, I used to try to race back home so I can attend an event or a cocktail hour or a dinner or a banquet. Madison, my experience has been any type of professional events that occur happen during the workday. Not a lot of happy hours, not a lot of, at least what I was experiencing at the time is you didn't get a lot of the professional networking in the afternoons or in the evenings. You got them during the workday. That was really difficult for me because I had to be at work and we were not downtown or we weren't by the square. And I think moving to Madison for me was hard in some ways. Like I knew people already. I obviously had worked there, but most of my network with lawyers, and I really wanted to have a network of friends outside of the legal profession. Madison is difficult for, I would say, for Black and brown young professionals, given that it's a very transient community. Most people there are coming from somewhere else. You're only there for a couple of years and then you're out. So either you're there for law or not for law school, either you're there for school, you're there for some sort of government contract, you're there working at Epic or Exact Sciences, and then you're out. So it was a little difficult to find my way, but we'll get to this. But eventually work consumed my life. So it didn't really matter where I was.
Yeah. So you legal counsel, you moved to Madison, you still at the Department of Corrections, and then something big happens. Tell us about that.
Let me back up to why something big happened.
Great.
I wasn't looking for a job. I was content working as a lawyer. I think I'll just say this. I was always looking to see what was out there so that I could make sure I had the skill set to move on to whatever was next. But I wasn't looking for a job. I got to meet the former Department of Workforce Development Secretary, Ray Allen, at a leadership event that I had gone to. And we met, we just happened to set up getting coffee 4 days after the 2018 gubernatorial election between Scott Walker and Governor Evers, or Tony Evers at the time. And he was a Walker appointee. And I remember him specifically telling me, you know, Makda, you should apply to be part of the Evers administration. I'm like, I don't have any political pull. I don't know anyone in the transition team. Like, how do I even do that? And he basically talked me through. He's like, first of all, you have nothing to lose by applying. You already are in a civil service position. The worst that can happen is they say no. And then two, he was like, they are looking for people that are talented, that have a different perspective, that will energize this administration. And I kind of just, I don't know, I wasn't really sure about what he was saying, but I was like, you know what, since he said it, and this is someone that I had just met, I was like, I'll just go for it. And so I put my name in the hat to apply for working for Governor Evers' administration. And that whole process.
Was there a specific position you had applied for?
No. So it's kind of a choose your own adventure type of thing. It's like a matching process.
Hey, Zelda.
So you, right. So you basically indicate what level of job you would be interested in, what departments you would be interested in, and and if there were any like committees or boards that you would be interested in. So I was selecting like chief legal counsel or working for Department of Workforce Development or Department of Administration. Most of my work had been around employment law. So I'm thinking there's nothing left for me at the Department of Corrections because I know how the leadership structure is. And I was mistaken. There was, in fact, a place for me at the Department of Corrections. And I was appointed to be the administrator for the Division of Adult Institutions for the Department of Corrections. And I started, I believe it was January 7th, 2019.
Now, that's just wild. I mean, you must have been one of the youngest people ever to have held that position.
I think you were the first Black woman too. Youngest.
Yeah. There was a lot of firsts in that role. I think I was the second person that was not a warden to hold that position. Typically, the trajectory was that wardens kind of went to warden, a deputy administrator. So I wasn't a warden. I was an attorney. I think I was the first attorney in that role. I was 28 at the time. And so I think maybe even the youngest appointee in the Evers administration, if not one of the youngest, first Black woman, or I would even say Black person in the role permanently. There was someone that was in there as interim. And so I wasn't the first woman. I think I was the second or third. But it was, and I'll just say that process was such a whirlwind. I found out that I got the job 3 days before I started. And at 12 o'clock when Governor Evers got inaugurated, it got announced that I started. And it was nonstop for 2 years.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Thank you to our podcast sponsor, Wilmick. Now, don't gamble with your legal malpractice coverage, because Wilmick sees your needs and raises your peace of mind. Wilmick, best bet ever.
Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up podcast.
Okay, so you're in the department already, right?
Right.
So all of a sudden,
as a lawyer,
so all of a sudden, you're the administrator. That's a lot of layers up.
Right.
So all of a sudden, in about 3 days, you have new subordinates that you didn't imagine having.
Correct.
How was that?
Yeah, it was such a whirlwind because I couldn't tell anyone. This was a job that I could not transition. So I remember trying, thankfully it was the end of the year, so there were caseloads that I was already closing out. But even the whole process of transitioning my work, I could not do because no one was supposed to know until it got announced. And with a political transition from different gubernatorial administrations, mayoral transitions, even the presidency, right? Those happen very quickly. And feelings get hurt in the process because I think some people would like to stay in their roles. Some people, they've put a lot of time and effort into it. At the Department of Corrections in particular, it was most of the appointees, not all, most of the appointees from the Walker administration got reshuffled or they were out of a position. And so it was a really challenging change because now all of a sudden there were people that were maybe two layers above me that now are working directly for me and so on and so forth. And so it was my first major supervisory role. And so all of that was happening at once. And I'm like, how the heck did I get this position? This wasn't what I envisioned for myself.
Have you met you? You're pretty spectacular.
Thanks, Emil. But knowing what the role was, you're responsible for prisons. I didn't even want to touch inmate litigation when I was a lawyer. I did if I had to, but I was very clear on what my area was. And so it was such a whirlwind, such a shift. Sometimes I wonder, at the time, I was like, did I make the right choice? But you don't have time to make a decision. You go for it because when else do you get a gubernatorial appointment?
So this was in 2019, right? Is when you started.
I started January 2019.
So you go from jobless at graduation,
right,
to an administrator of the DOC.
Like in 5 years.
In 5 years.
Pretty quick.
Yeah.
And you said academics weren't your thing, and yet You were able to thrive.
Well, I would like to say that I was a good student up until law school.
Why did you clean that up? I just wanted to clean that up. I'll give you the opportunity to clean that up.
No, I would just say that law school was challenging for me academically. I didn't understand it, and it took me a while to get into my groove. But it wasn't that, and I think I think a lot of people feel this way, right?
Yeah.
Like everyone is smart, or at least you think everyone is smart. And it was a completely new way of thinking, writing, studying. And I had too much pride to ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that I was doing myself a disservice because I wasn't asking people for help and thinking that by doing so, I would look bad. But I was like, girl, your grades are making you look bad. Like not you not asking for help. But I turned it around, right? And again, it was that I knew that academically I wasn't the strongest in law school, but I could be strong in other areas.
But touching on that statement about academic strengths and finding your groove.
Yeah.
I think in a normal setting, that's fine, right? It's almost expected that everyone gets to find their groove in a new environment. What happens is that law school happens so quickly and you start getting judged pretty quickly in your academic performances. Basically, it's like first year break. I mean, it's which is a little bit odd, right? Because you think about the transitions. We're coming into an environment where it's different than anything you've ever experienced. Lots of people are moving from out of town. They are experiencing new things, and it takes a while. It's a different way of learning, a different way of grading. So, because I mean, I know that you're referring to your very, very early parts of law school.
Right.
Which is just so odd because if you think about it in totality, it was a good experience, academically. But
I think also with law school, like there's a lot of, and maybe we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but like politics around law school generally. And I'm sure that it's different school to school and it varies, but you're in this one big building doing the same thing with people who are all type A's. I don't know, are used to excelling academically. They probably had excelled wherever they were. So then we're graded on a curve. So then that makes it this weird competitive nature. And then there's subtext there. I think there is racial and I think there's subtext, gender. Like there's a lot of that's going on that we don't talk about a whole lot.
And class and family history.
Class, like all of those things, your background, if you never really thought about it before, you start thinking of, I didn't think about that deeply until I got in law school, when you're looking at other people and you don't understand, like, why is this clicking so easily for them? It's not because they're brilliant. It's because, your mom's a lawyer too.
Right.
So these concepts are easy for you or you understand this professional setting. This is not your first time being in a professional setting, but for me, maybe it is. Yeah. So all of those things school is already its own beast.
Right.
But then the politics of that are like all coming together and you have to deal with it. And I think we all navigated that in an interesting way.
Yeah. And people they're all in your business too, right? It's like everyone wants to know how the other person is doing. And I remember studying for exams, and you all probably experienced this too, because I would be down in the lobby. I don't remember what it's called. The forum. And so people would always come and talk to me and they'd be like, did you know this or that? And all of a sudden I'd get confused because I'm like, I didn't know what they're talking about. Like, I don't remember that as part of our class. And so it was just, I think for me, it was more about, I learned later on that I was better at the practical aspects of law and not the theoretical. And once I found out that my learning style was what it was, everything started to click.
So I think it's important to hear for folks to hear this, especially those who might be in a similar boat, meaning just recently graduated, maybe don't have a job or not at the job they want. After your first job, when was the next time you got asked about your grades?
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Help protect against the unexpected with accidental death and dismemberment insurance. Guaranteed acceptance is a benefit of your State Bar of Wisconsin membership. Coverage is issued by the Prudential Insurance Company of America. To learn more, visit wisbar.memberenroll.com. That is wisbar.memberenroll.com.
Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
Right.
Like never.
Right.
I mean, especially, I try to tell law school students, right? Hey, don't get me wrong. Absolutely, your grades are very important in terms of a head start. But like for those who may have taken some time, because you think about it, even if you struggled with your first year, it's still a third. It's very hard to sort of make magic happen after that first year, right? After that, people looking at your body of works. Like,
right.
No one, for I'm assuming with you guys, you know, when the institutions you worked with, besides your first job, no client has ever asked me, like, hey, dude,
I need to see that.
Can I see that transcript?
Right.
Let me see it.
Right.
You know,
and the only reason I ever talk about my experience being challenging is because I think, and I say this to students all the time, they're like, oh my God, I can't do law school. And I'm like, yes, you can. I did it. I figured it out. It took a little bit, but I think sometimes people, they'll lie about their experience, or they'll say that, it was amazing. Actually, you say that sometimes, right? Like you had a great
Both of the two of you were quite the social butterflies. So I see that you had a different experience than I did.
I had a good law school experience. Academically, it clicked. I did well, but I also knew that, like you said, certain things did come a little easier for certain folks. I also didn't want to sacrifice the social elements of myself.
You didn't.
You know, because I realized at the end of the day, I wanted to get out. I'm not getting out of this class, but I'm supposed to get out of it.
Fair.
I want to be a good lawyer, not just a good law school student.
Absolutely.
And so I'm sorry if to get an A, if I had to like spend 2 more hours to get an A+ as opposed to an A, maybe I'll go hang out with the community folks and get, you know, and just go do other stuff that completes.
I also just think our personalities are that we're just.
I was going to say both of you were quite the. I did not. You guys were a little too much for me in law school, like socially. That. No, you were socially.
Because you're an introvert. Here's this Kristen
please don't put the air quotes on it. It's true. But it just was like, I had a whole different lens on it, and I treated school in a different way than I think. And that's not a criticism. It's just, it's value either way it goes, but it's just different. So I commend you for that having that experience.
Well, for me, things changed, I think, after my second year, because I think I shifted from having that, this is law school, it's everything, coming back without a job offer after getting several offers from Big Law after the OCI process was pretty humbling and had me reset. My last year of law school, I barely even spent in law school because I was at the prosecutor clinic, and I was just so, you know, I on some level got to see that other aspect of things where, okay, my grades are just not enough now, you know, and it forces you to pivot, and it forces you to really, really think about, okay, well, what are you trying to grab out as experience, and what do you do when the path isn't laid out for you?
Absolutely.
You know, so I've been on both of those. You know, drinking the Kool-Aid.
You have a good perspective because you know how it is on both sides of the coin. So,
and I just want to say for the record, the socialization part of it did not impact my grades.
I did not imply that. I did not imply that. I think it has helped both of you be successful. So that was not a criticism. It was just a observation.
I'm gonna have to cross-examine you on this whole introvert thing.
You can, and you're not an introvert. You're gonna lose because
she is a extrovert introvert.
Yes, and if you
Me
know,
too.
no, please,
I'm
sir.
an extrovert. Aren't you an extrovert introvert?
No, I'm an extrovert through and through.
Oh, really?
What?
Yes.
I'm an extrovert.
No, you would much prefer.
So.
Both of you would much prefer to be sitting somewhere chit-chatting with someone out somewhere. If I go somewhere by myself, I don't want you to talk to me. I'm there because I don't want to talk. Both of you would find a stranger and strike up a conversation because you like to talk and you like to engage. It's a reason that I like you both. Like that's a thing. That is just not me.
It's a balance.
It's not me.
All my friends are actually like Kristen.
Yeah,
well, you play extrovert really well.
You have to. That's the game. Unfortunately, this is the world. And I do like to engage, and I like to engage. It was just like most of the time, can I please have a break? Like tomorrow, oh no, tomorrow I have to talk to people. Sunday, I'm not talking to anyone. It's going to be so great. Like I'm excited for it. So back to, all right, Department of Corrections, you're leading administration. I would love to get into war stories on all your roles, but it's so confidential, the nature of your jobs.
Some of it isn't.
We're gonna go right by that, and we're gonna talk about the next role coming back to Milwaukee. So tell us about your next opportunity with the city.
So I was in the administrator role from January 2019 through January 2021. So that means I was there at the height of the pandemic, leading an emergency operations center. I had never done that before, leading emergency management, pandemic, like everything. Surprisingly enough, I wasn't looking for a job. I probably should have been, but I wasn't looking for a job. I really wanted to stick it out. But I came upon an opportunity at the city of Milwaukee to work in the Department of Employee Relations. And it was somewhat serendipitous in the way in which I even came about it. There were folks that were asking me to apply for a different job happening at the city, or that was open at the city. And I came across this particular position. And so I was really grateful that a lot of people had referred me for the role. I met then with Mayor Tom Barrett. It was a really easy conversation. And in that moment, I realized that I really liked employment law. I really liked human resources. I know I can supervise a department, right? I know I can supervise people. I know the foundations of HR. I know the foundation of employment law. And I really wanted to come back to Milwaukee. I think being in Madison, it was nice, but also being there by myself during the height of the pandemic was really difficult.
Joe's been giving you a lot of stares every time you talk. About not liking Madison.
I didn't say I didn't like it.
As Milwaukee.
She liked Madison. I remember. She liked Madison.
I found my way in Madison, but I was really excited about moving back because I just felt like I was here all the time anyway. Some people didn't even realize I moved. I was really excited to come back and really serve the community in a different way. Working for the Department of Corrections, there's maybe some moral challenges that I had with the work, especially at the height of the social justice movements in 2020. So coming back to Milwaukee and working in a different type of capacity, it just felt very natural. And I loved working at the city. We got so much done in a short amount of time. People were eager for change. I think there was just a new energy happening because things were opening up around the time that I started from the pandemic. And I got to do some really cool stuff while I was there. And I worked with our council really well. I was able to help the transition between Mayor Barrett, who had been in office for 18 years, to transition to Mayor Cavalier Johnson. And funny enough, my experience transitioning over at the Department of Corrections during a major gubernatorial change prepared me tremendously for the mayoral change, because change is hard. Big transitions like that are hard, but I had already been through it in a very whirlwind way that at the city, I'm like, well, we knew that Tom Barrett was leaving. So we kind of got to prepare ourselves in advance for it.
So that brings up a really good point, and we can talk briefly about your work at the city. But what I think is interesting is push outside of the city and how you decided to transition to another role after, what was it, about a year? Mm-hmm. Because that's quick, and that's another job, and now you're in academia, which is different.
Yeah.
But also, as you were leaving, you got your own day. So let's talk about this day.
Makda Fessahaye Day.
And what are we supposed to do on this day? We are really curious.
It's a Milwaukee holiday.
It's a holiday. What do we do?
What's the day again?
It is March 17th.
March 17th. Every year.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks,
call
guys.
the iPhone folks to put that on the automatic calendar.
Oh, let's go like that. Let's get
or, you can always just remember it at St. Patty's Day.
I think this. I like this one. I like this.
You like the Makda Fessahaye Day instead?
I like it. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about that. So did you work under Mayor Johnson at all?
I did.
So how was that? First Black elected mayor in the city of Milwaukee. What was that experience like?
Yeah, really cool. I actually I only worked for him for about about a week when he was formally elected. I was already transitioning out of my role, but it was exciting to have him elected into that role. I had worked with him when he was an alderman. Funny enough, because the world is so small, his brother and I used to work together at the Department of Corrections.
Oh, wow.
And so I had heard stories of him, but I got to, finally meet him when I went to the city. I think it was exciting. But again, as all transitions happen, you're thinking about elections, you're thinking about next steps, who's going to come into the role, make sure that you're not making too many waves before an election, right? And so it was, I liked the energy around it. I think, I'll say this, both Mayor Barrett and Mayor Johnson were very supportive of me and what I was trying to do for the city. And it's exciting to see the work continue, things that either I've done or things that were in the works with my other colleagues there. And yeah, I really enjoyed working with both of them. And I think they're really smart in their own different ways.
I think it's really tough. Lawyers, historically, we say this all the time, are not good at management, like people management.
Correct.
We're really good at doing our work and putting our heads down. But when it comes to people management, and I have been a people manager, it's tough. It is not intuitive. But Makda, you've been able to transition and do that job really well. I've even worked with people at NM who've worked with you and speak very highly of you. So before we jump to your next role, which maybe it'll dovetail in it, I want you to talk a little bit about how you've been able to hone these good skills, these people management skills, because that is a job within itself. You have to know how to do the job. You have to understand the organization, the politics, and the culture. It's even more difficult when it's like the city, because that you're in politics with electeds. But how have you been able to be successful at people management as a lawyer?
And now, a word from our sponsors. Attention Wisconsin attorneys! Are you tired of looking around those bulky brown binders? Then say hello to Books Unbound. With a fast and user-friendly interface, your legal research just got easier. Take notes, bookmark, and access primary law resources with just one click. Books Unbound is your one-stop shop for all your legal needs. Visit booksunbound.wisbar.org and unlock the power of knowledge today. Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
I think it goes back to my original job working in HR because I was responsible for advising supervisors on how to supervise their people. Like I would create and host trainings for them, how to do a proper performance evaluation, how to deal with discipline, how to deal with difficult employees. Like those were things that thankfully I learned it along the way, but I also was supposed to be the expert on it because people would call me and say, we have a really difficult situation. How would you recommend doing this? And so I would not only hone in on my skills, on my legal skills, on what you can and cannot do legally, but I knew our policies really well too. And I was able to navigate both very easily. The politics side of it, I don't know if that was just, I think some of it was a little bit innate. Some of it was just seeing the best and worst of supervisors that you've seen over time and try to find ways that work to address different people. And at the end of the day, working with politicians, working with correctional officers, working with academics, etc., you have to remove that layer of, you can't put everyone on a pedestal, right? They're all human at the end of the day. And I think sometimes people don't know how to navigate the space because they're thinking of people in a particular title and not just as a person.
Sure.
So I think in terms of navigating all of that, I think it was just a common thread throughout my career. I had to deal with people or advising people or addressing people's behavior. And I think then I was able to just take all of that and put it into practice when it came to dealing with real life situations. And also being aware that everyone's going through something and you have to be empathetic, but you also need to get your stuff done. And so you have to find ways to motivate people and meet people where they're at.
I think probably a superpower, I was just tasked with doing this by a mentor. Think about an underutilized superpower that you have. Maybe you don't even know you're using it, but you're using it. I know, that's tough. Good ones, executives.
This is some TED Talk style mentoring sessions.
And I was like, that's tough. But if I was thinking about that for you, I would say, because you're such a people person and you really do care about people and you're interested in what they have to say and what they have going on, it probably helps make you a good people leader, because people feel that. They can tell, like, oh, you're interested in what I have to say. You're going to empathize with me, or at least try to understand me. And I don't know if you realize that, but just on the outside looking in, I think that's probably like a superpower that you have. And it's
a lot of lawyers do. You actually take a genuine interest in people.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say this as a dig at the profession, but I think in more traditional lawyer roles, right, you're very used to people being interested and taking genuine interest in what you have to say and the advice that you have to give, that I think sometimes lawyers aren't always given that opportunity, except they're trying to cross-examine you for something or direct, but it's like very purpose-driven. Like, hey, tell me about yourself. So how were you able to how were you able to develop that skill, that superpower?
Yeah.
Well, thanks, guys. It's interesting because one of the things when I was practicing law, people would always ask me for advice that was non-legal. Because they were like, well, how would you do this, right? Or how would you navigate this political situation? Or how would you navigate this policy issue? And most of the time people are like, it's not a legal issue, I can't answer it. And I think because of my experiences, I would just work with them because I was genuinely interested in solving the issue with them. And I wanted them to be successful. And then if you think about it as lawyers, whatever work that we're working on together, that's eventually going to be preventative for any potential issues down the line. And so I really was interested in like a holistic approach even to practicing law, because I got to see other areas prior to practicing. In terms of like honing in the people skill, one thing I will say, when I took that administrator role, I was terrified. And it was really challenging because these are people that sought my advice for law, and now all of a sudden I'm their boss. And that's a big shift for people. One of the things, I went around and I met with every single person that I was either going to directly supervise or that was going to indirectly be under my supervision. And I met with them and I just asked, like, what are you looking for from me as your leader? And I remember a lot of folks saying, we really want you to listen and respect our expertise. And one of the first things I did when I met with them in a big meeting was I was very transparent to them. I'm like, look, I don't know how I got here either. Like we're all trying to answer the same question. But what I think was beneficial to me in building trust with people was that I walked into it saying, I don't know what you know. Mm-hmm. I am going to observe. I'm going to work with you. And I think that has helped along the way in my supervision of people, departments, structures, because we all know when there's people that will just come in out the gate and be like, everything needs to be changed. Right. And it's like, no, I have to learn it first. I can't just go in guns a-blazing and just change everything at a snap.
No shock and awe.
Right.
We gotta let some heads roll. Just
no, because that's not fair to anyone there. And we're all professionals. Like they didn't just get there because like
not one head. Just chop up.
And let me tell you, there were folks that were very challenging to deal with. But
there always are. I want to also talk about WAL, because we served on the WAL board together for a couple of years. You're a past WAL president.
Mm-hmm. I got two past WAL presidents here.
Indeed. Yeah. Are you next? You want to be on top? That was a Tyra Banks, America's Next Top Model quote.
if the Lord wills it in the future, maybe.
All right. Where I was going with that was, WAL is near and dear to you like it is to me. And something that I thought was really cool during your time on the board was kind of digging in to some of these member opportunities. I can't remember. Was that your idea to come up with the Member Appreciation Month?
Yes.
And sometimes I think these things get lost in translation. Like people don't realize who started what. And it's not because we don't do it for the glory, but it's also like, hey, yeah, I had something to do with that cool thing that continues to live on. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about you joining the board and like how you tried to leave an impact or what you think your mark was on the organization as it goes forward.
And for those who don't know, WAL is the Wisconsin
Association of African American Lawyers.
And now, a word from our sponsors. What? You don't have an Ultimate Pass yet? Oh, that's a mistake. Find out why at wismar.org/ultimatepass. Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up podcast.
I joined, when did you join, Kristen? 2014?
Mm-hmm.
So I joined in 2015. And I actually joined, I believe, as a membership and engagement coordinator. Yeah, I think that was the role that I had, which is why Membership Appreciation Month started. But yeah, I think WAL was a big part of our law school experience. It was really important to see Black lawyers be visible to us when we were in law school. But one thing that I didn't even realize until I got to law school is how many Black lawyers had been visible to me throughout my upbringing, being from here. Like, for example, like Judge Carl Ashley. I didn't know his name was Carl. I thought his name was
Chief Judge.
Oh, Chief Judge.
Judge
You're
Ashley.
right.
Actually.
But like as a kid, I just thought his name was Judge. Like, right? Like I didn't know that. I thought.
I'm definitely playing misfortune.
Yeah,
Oh, it has to go.
The podcast.
absolutely. No, absolutely.
Think she
Yeah,
knew your name?
he's a member of your church.
Yeah,
right?
so like
it's your kid.
it was a family that I would see on Sundays. Like my dad, was a youth group minister, so he mentored his children and family members of his, and so not his children, sorry, his nieces and nephews, and so I didn't realize how many attorneys and judges I was surrounded by growing up, or not only judges and attorneys, how many influential figures of Milwaukee I was around, because in my mind, these are people I just went to church with.
Right.
And so with WAL, it was so important for me, and I think this is just a common thread in everything that I do, is I like being able to give back to the community that I feel has put a lot into me and invested in me. And I think there's such an important, WAL is so incredibly important, not just for the representation, because you can just have representation all day, but you have to have something behind that representation, which is the work and the engagement and the fellowship and the commitment to Black attorneys, and also being able to set the tone. And I think WAL has done this for other affinity groups within the state bar. And I think they would all say that. And so for me, it was really important in my tenure with WAL to not just sit on the board. I think anyone can do that, but to actually be effective and actually make membership dues worth something,
Right.
Be it CLEs, be it events, be it panels. And so Kristen, you and I had worked on maybe a plan on our own, like a strategic plan on our own. And I actually remember doing it while I was at the Board of Governors meeting, because I was a WAL representative, and really trying to structure it in a way that goes beyond any one of us, and really understanding like the legacy of people like Val Phillips to make sure that we're being true to the mission and goals of WAL, and also understanding that we're not here on our own. Like there are so many people that have come before us that have opened doors, that have kicked down doors. And so for me, being WAL president was especially special. It again happened to be around the pandemic that I was the president, but it didn't stop the work from being done. And I think we did a lot of great work to be very visible, to not just the Black attorney or the Black legal community, but to the entire legal community and beyond.
Yeah, I'm not on the WAL board anymore, and I'm sure you get this too, where people are like, so what's going on with WAL? Like Kristen, Makda, like we were WAL at one point, and that's not a humble brag or anything. It's just that we were so like it's a labor of love to be a part of an organization.
I think you guys
like
did a very effective job. If I could sum up your time on the board, it was all about Black attorney visibility, which
part of it.
I mean, for me, I've never been a board member, so as one of the constituents for which this was being done to, that's the most memorable thing, because it wasn't as, I don't know the entire history of it, but I would say while we were in law school in the very early days of our career, WAL wasn't the organization it is today. And so I think starting with you guys and continuing on now, there's been this level of intentionality that's been infused back into the organization, from the events, the scholarship, the Bell Phillips Scholarship. And the most important thing is like, hey, we're here. They're Black lawyers. And also we're going to advocate for opportunities for them. So I think that you have been, both of you have been very instrumental in an increase in, I would say, PR, not PR.
Can I just say this? Yes, that's a big part of it. I mean, we did a lot more than that, but that had to be a big piece of it. I remember one of these lists, you are going to remember this, Makda. One of these award lists came out about lawyers or whatever, and there was not one person of color on the list. And off the top of my head, I could rattle off 3 who I thought belonged on that list, and they were not there. And I go, well, why is that? And that became it feels like none of these things were done haphazardly. Like there was a strategic plan, and there was all this intentionality behind. I really don't, if super lawyers matters, which I don't think of super lawyers, but if super lawyers helps your business, why aren't you on the list? And if you're not on the list, is it because you don't have time? Because maybe you're a solo? Is it because people don't recognize you? Is it because you don't recognize that you need that? Organizations like ours should be saying, and that's what we started doing, like, hey, let's either create our own awards, or maybe we're writing something for an award, or we're putting people out there so that they are getting recognized for these things. Or the Board of Governors, for example, which we know I'm a big state bar person. I love the state bar. We always have building bridges liaisons. So each affinity bar association has a representative. And for the longest time, we would have the same person on the wall board be the liaison, and that's fine. But what's more impactful if you actually want to have more diversity on the board? If you say, hey, you have a 1-year term, like you're a board, you could be a board member, keep running, that's fine on the wall board. But as a liaison, you have a 1-year term. And then we put somebody else there, run for a seat, become a governor. And if you look at literally just from that exercise, the governors, how it has changed from once upon a time, it was just maybe 1 Black or 2 Black faces in the room, Black attorneys. And now they're always at least between 4 and 7 or 4 and 10 Black and brown faces, because we said, roll off and run. We'll put another person there. You go, I like this. This is important stuff that the state bar is doing. I want to be a governor. Okay, run. Go get your signatures and win. And then you put another person in. So that stuff, yes, it's about visibility, but also it's about like, this stuff is important. And if everyone else is doing it, why aren't we doing it?
Yeah, but the reason I highlight the visibility is that if people don't even know you're here.
Yes.
And that was why, that, at least for me, it's the most important. And not just the visibility, as an independent byproduct, but it was also the first time in a city and in a state where, in a profession where younger people of color don't necessarily, or their voices aren't necessarily as highlighted. You guys were very, unapologetic about that. It was the first time we saw young Black attorneys blazing their own paths, but also being very intentional in speaking on behalf of an entire crop of folks. And not just, and it transcended from just Black lawyers to young lawyers of color. I don't think at least in my time coming into the, being a member of the bar, you guys made that cool. You guys made, not just cool, cool's the wrong word, but you guys took that on.
We made it fetch.
Is that a term?
Yeah, it's like cool. It's like cool. But thank you, Emil.
That was calm. No. By the way, if you go to London, you say calm. That means okay.
No, we're not worldly. We didn't know. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Travel more.
Wow.
That was a joke because you don't. You don't.
Yourself.
I'm joking. But no, and I don't think I've ever, told you guys this, but thank you. It was important, and I think because of the work that you guys have done and the work that has continued to be done by Wall and all these affinity bars there, and obviously with the world happening too. But there's a place at the table for young people of color, Black people, Black attorneys in Wisconsin. So keep blazing those paths. Now, Makda, we are at a point where you go from jobless
to administrator.
To administrator. No, first non-legal job, then a legal counsel role, then you're leading a department at the state, then you lead a department at the city. And then, I mean, for a lot of people, that's a whole career.
Right.
That's true.
Right.
Yes.
And you're like, I'm still not done.
Yeah.
What happens next?
No, I want to talk about why you took your next role. Like what, I mean, I know the answer, but what was some of give us some of the reasons why you took this next role.
Very briefly, I was not looking for a role.
You're never looking.
That's your common theme.
It is.
They just come and find you. You're just so amazing.
Dear God, I'm not looking for a billing. And it just comes to me.
But I wasn't. I was really excited about working with Mayor Johnson. So I tell this story, and I always feel like people probably think I'm lying because it sounds like a lie. And the only reason I know it wasn't a lie is because I texted Kristen right after it happened. I woke up in the middle of the night thinking I was going to lose my job at the city. There was no reason for that. My job wasn't on the chopping block. I knew Mayor Barrett was leaving, but I had already known that I was staying on. Regardless of who was going to become mayor at that time, I knew that HR was going to be the last to go, if anything, right, as a political appointee. But I woke up in the middle of the night in this panic, and literally I grabbed my phone. Usually if I'm waking up in the middle of the night, I'm scrolling through Instagram or whatever. Something happened, and I Googled UWM Chief Human Resources Officer role, just like that, out of nowhere. And the job had just been posted 2 days before. And I remember being like, whoa, like I could do this job. But I felt really bad because I'm like, I really want to work for Mayor Johnson. I'm really enjoying the momentum we have within the Department of Employee Relations. I don't want to apply for this, right? And I remember talking to Kristen about it because one of the things that I was fearful at some point in my career, I think I was in legal counsel at the time. I was really fearful when I was in legal counsel that I would be pigeonholed to be a corrections employee. Not because there was anything wrong with corrections, but I just saw my career going beyond working there. I had worked with people that had been there 30, 40 years, and they led great careers. I just didn't see that for myself. And remember when you asked me earlier about my first job at corrections, I said I was going to be there for 2 years. Mm-hmm. It ended up being almost 7. And so I've always been thinking about how can I make myself marketable in the future? And how can I make sure that whatever it is that I do, I have some flexibility to move forward? And what I saw in this potential opportunity at UWM, I was like, well, I've been in government for 8 years. Maybe I should try academia. And it wasn't because what's interesting is early on again in my career, I had thoughts about working for a university. I just didn't know how to get there. Mm-hmm. And so when this opportunity came up, I'm like looking down the job listing and I'm like, yeah, I can do everything that they're saying. I have experience in everything that they're saying. But then I was like, well, I don't have any academia experience. So that's against me. From what I remember, I applied on the last possible day to apply because, again, I was feeling really bad about doing so. But I was just like, you know what? Let me just go for it. Let's see what happens. Again, worst that can happen, I already have a job. Went through the process, and I was really privileged to be offered the position, and not having that higher education background actually made me more desired because they were looking for something a little bit more transformative at the time and not status quo. And I think that was what helped me get across the finish line. And I actually had, UWM is a urban access research institution. Having some of those community ties is really important to the work of UWM. And I already had that. And not only did I have that, I had like a political cachet, and I had, a level of social status, if you will, that I could bring to the table on top of all of my work experiences and accomplishments. And so I thought that, at the end of the day, this is a different industry. It's a new challenge. I haven't worked in a university setting before. Why not see where else I can take my career? Again, being young, because I didn't know where I was going to end up in my career. For all intents and purposes, I thought I was going to be a lawyer this entire time, or a practicing lawyer, I should say. That it has career trajectory has been more of a roller coaster than like a linear career, but that's okay because I've really enjoyed that process.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Are you a paralegal in Wisconsin looking to take your career to the next level? Consider becoming a State Bar of Wisconsin certified paralegal. Holding this voluntary certification shows that you are a professional of the highest caliber with Wisconsin-specific education and experience. Visit wisbar.org/paralegal to learn more about how you can become a certified paralegal and take your career to the next level. Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
Here's a fun fact. Makda and I almost always get a job or a new job at the same time.
We do.
So it's like if one person gets a new job,
That's a good indication.
It's almost like even if you're not. So I think I got this job first. Yeah.
No, so this job happened, your job right now corresponded with my job at the city.
Yeah. When did you start the city?
2021.
Yeah, I started this job 2021. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So then you got a new job after that.
Yeah.
So not quite.
You're next, Kristen.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm very happy where I am.
I know.
I have no plans to leave. I like where I am. But no, for the most part, we have almost always, since our first job, it's always around the same time. And now we joke like, oh, have you got a new job?
Right.
And so thank you.
Or a promotion. It wasn't always leaving.
That's
right.
true. Or promotion. Yeah, it's always the same. Again, I think that's the power of like the people in your circle.
Yeah.
You know, if they level up or they move around, it gives you the I don't know how to. I don't mean confidence, but it's just like, oh, okay, well, like that's not so crazy of a thought. To think to move around. Like, yeah, I guess I wanted to stay here, but you're moving around. Maybe I could, and it's not a big deal.
And I'll say I wasn't really keen on leaving a place after a year.
Right.
I had spent almost 7 years at corrections, and now I'm going to up and leave the city. Like I told them I was going to stay, but there was also these jobs at universities at these executive levels do not come by often. These are not political jobs, so you're not basing off of a political term like you would in government. These people literally do their entire careers there. I think my predecessor had been in the role for maybe 10 years. When I was at the city, the person before me had been there 17 years. I feel like I continue to go after people that have had long careers in these positions, and they're not easily accessible because people like them and stay in them.
So you've been to the pinnacle, the zenith of three different departments or institutions, right? These are things that people work their whole careers for.
So
You've been able to achieve that in 10 years, less than 10 years. Because, it's been 9 years since we've all graduated from school. And so what motivates you then? Because one has to ask, because you're just smashing these records. You're breaking these glasses. It's like, okay, all right, is that it? Boom. So
I think it's the mission. I think if there's anything about like the common thread throughout my career so far has been mission. Either serving people that are incarcerated, serving people, Milwaukee residents, serving students and employees. I think I've been really drawn to mission-driven organizations that I see making an impact in their respective community. And that's no dig on any other organization, but I think that helps keep me going. I certainly see the work that UWM has done in the community being, in our backyard and all of the impact that they've done, everything that the city does to literally make our lives go around in our day to day. And so for me, I think that's the common thread in everything that I've done so far is I want to work for an organization that I know is making an impact in the community in which I live in.
We're getting close to the end, but I think that's a really that's a good segue to talk about to talk about why mission is important to you. And I think we cannot end this interview without talking about my friend, Makda's father, who I love dearly, and how all of his work has informed, or like just your childhood and your upbringing. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that plays a role, and why you're so drawn to mission-driven organizations?
Yeah, I think so. So we moved to Milwaukee when I was 5 years old. My dad got a job here working for our church, and everything related to his job was youth ministry, community development, family ministry. And so, and also being a Black Catholic church in the Central City, we were in the middle of a lot of the different initiatives happening for Black people in Milwaukee. And so I remember, first of all, I didn't go to summer camp. I went to my dad's office over the summer. I went to the library. I went to community events, and I went to meetings with him. I remember I went to a meeting with him. He was meeting with Senator Feingold, and I was just sitting there reading a book, and then I like piped up and gave my 2 cents about, I don't know, politics in Africa. But my dad was out in the community and still is. And I think having that upbringing, having that, my parents always really imparted onto me that like you have to serve the community that you live in. Like you did not get here on your own. You have to give back. And I think that's actually something that my entire family has really grown up in. I was just reflecting on my grandfather today, who was an Eritrean government official during the War for Independence. And so for him, like the value of education and service was key. And so I think that just got passed down in different ways. And that was my maternal grandfather. And then my dad, you know, he left home fairly young for school, and
home being Eritrea.
Yeah, home being
East
Eritrea, Africa. In East Africa. And so being in Milwaukee, I just saw like the power of community is so crucial, and it can make or break your experiences. If you don't have a village behind you, if you don't have a community behind you, you can get lost. Mm-hmm. And I think going back to what you said, Emil, earlier, is Milwaukee is a place that you can shape it to be what it is that you want. But you can't do that in a silo either. Right. You have to utilize the community that you are a part of or want to be a part of. And so I think for me, without realizing it, I think throughout my career, I was drawn to these mission-driven organizations because even in my extracurriculars, I was already volunteering, but there was still something about knowing that whatever the organization is doing, even if I'm not at the forefront of it, right? I don't directly work with students at UWM, but I know that my work helps with the quality of education that they get, with the quality of staff that we have, et cetera. So yeah, I definitely say that my family, my dad especially, really probably unintentionally imparted that onto me, because I was everywhere with him. Like you would never see me like I was literally at every parade that we had. We used to have Juneteenth parades, and you know, it was just everywhere.
And now, a word from our sponsors. In these uncertain economic times, the State Bar of Wisconsin wants to make sure that you and your practice have the best available tools. Ultimate Pass and Books Unbound are available for purchase using 6-month installment plans. Contact our customer service team at 1-800-728-7788 for more information. Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up podcast.
And I know this too as well. I think the first time I met your father, I was doing some volunteer work for an immigration. Because I mean, not to take away from his impact to the city as a whole, but I think a group where he's been very impactful and where he's a superstar in happens to be with the immigrant population, African immigrant population in the city and across the state. And I say that because, unfortunately, I think when people think about immigration in America today, right, there's a certain picture that comes in. I don't think people think about African immigrants. And I remember the work your father was doing then. Didn't have to, but I think that organization's goal was just solely dealing with either refugees or new asylum seekers, or just general the immigrant community. And trying to plug them with just resources within the community. Yeah. And when I saw that, I think a lot of things about you made sense. And the way he did it wasn't just what he did; it was how he went about it. And so, growing up in that environment, I'm assuming you had it. That wasn't, he just didn't discover that when I met him like 10 years ago. So you must have grown up in that. You get to see different people.
Actually, no. No, my dad, for the most of my life, my dad was working for our church. He transitioned to opening this nonprofit at the time called it was the Pan-African Community Association. I think that really took off towards the end of high school for me and while I was away at college. And so when you met him, they were, it was when we were in law school. But what I saw my dad was grassroots community building for our church, because he worked not only at my church, but our sister parishes as well. And so I remember my dad ran our after school program. He ran our summer Bible school. And I remember both the after school program, summer Bible school, Sunday Bible school, all of that wasn't even mainly from parishioners from my church. It was people from the neighborhood and that engagement, because it wasn't necessarily just about faith building. It was about community building and really having a grassroots effort to show people that you care about them. And so I saw that firsthand, and I would be walking down the street with him, knocking on doors, trying to get people to come to like summer Bible school and, making bologna sandwiches for after school. Right. And so, it's interesting that it ended up really shaping who I became, but I was always my father's daughter. I look like him. I wanted to be just like him. So it wasn't a surprise when there were things that I was interested in because of him. But I also knew that there were certain things that I don't want to do because of what I've seen him go through.
I think something that's really interesting just about like the Black experience, particularly the Black American experience, is that community, and I'm big on that too, about the collective, like the importance of the collective and community, but that transcends class, that transcends everything. And it's something that, I appreciate that's a common thread in your life and in your family, that always giving back to the community, being of the community, because without that, like you've had a privilege in that way to be in those rooms and be around these people. And you don't realize it's a privilege growing up, right? That you're sitting in a room with the senator. Right. Like, that's not a thing, but it's because your dad is of the community. And that clearly has helped inform the rest of your life. So I just think it's a cool thing. Shout out to your parents.
Yeah, and I think it's, it's not just a Black American experience. I think it's actually deeply rooted in the African culture.
Sure.
Because,
I'm not just the Black diaspora experience.
Yeah, that's why I said
even
that.
the term, it takes a village, right? And also I would say with immigrants in general, like, for example, I have Indian friends. It's not uncommon for people not to move out of their houses until they want to get married. I have grown friends
same.
who are,
absolutely,
and I think, with your experience and having your father be so active, because the beautiful thing about your father is it's easy to do it when it's your family, right? Or a distant relation. Taking that same model of the nuclear family or the extended family and then replicating that out in the community, which I see in your work. I feel like we could go on and on and on and on and on.
We could. I do want to add one thing, though. I think what made it probably easier for my father to do that, when I was in D.C., we had family everywhere. Yeah. When we moved to Milwaukee, we had no family. And so you have to create a family. You have to create a community for yourself. Some of that was innate in him, like who he was as a person. Some of it was part of the job, but you had to create community because we were transplants. And so I've never said that Milwaukee has always been my home. This is where I'm from. This is where I've been raised. And I think part of that is because it wasn't just a community that we could take for granted. We had to find it, and we had to create it for ourselves.
That's a good place to end.
Actually, no. I'm going to have you end on one point. Back to the point. We've done a lot of things. We all started with the topic, which is there are lots of people right now who are trying to navigate graduating law school without a job.
Yeah.
There are people who are either early in their careers or midpoint in their careers faced with a lot of uncertainty. You've been there. You've been there. You've gotten to the mountaintops 3 different times, currently still there. What advice do you have for those people going through that ordeal at the moment?
If you missed all that advice during this, wrap it up in about, because you've given advice.
I think one, make sure that you are leaning upon a community that's there for you. Don't have too much pride to ask for help. Try to build upon your skill sets. It's not necessarily about the title, and nor is it about you don't have to rush to get where you are. Slow down. Like I'm fortunate to have been where I am now, but it's not I don't take it lightly either, and nor was I rushing to get here. And so I think those are the 2 or 3 things that are extremely important in your journey. And if you're uncertain, ask for help. Like, people will guide you. There are so many people here that they're just dying to give their wisdom and share their experiences, but be realistic. Like, I think whatever is for you will be for you.
Well, Makda, thank you so much for your time. I know a lot of these things, but it's sort of amazing to hear it again. And I think sometimes Kristen and I maybe take that for granted because we get to...
I don't. Maybe you do. Speak for yourself.
Oh my God. I'm feeling attacked. All right, we're going to do the whole end again. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. Thanks for sharing your story. It's very inspirational. We wish you the best. I know there's more to come.
Thanks, Emil.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kristen.
Appreciate you, Makda. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you have a topic you'd like us to explore, let us know. I'm your host, Emil Ovbiagele, and we'll catch you next time.